Nation, good evening. Welcome to another Drew P. Whiskey video. A What's the Deal video. For good old time's sake. I just got back from Ireland. I mentioned that on the last video where we talked about Evan Williams single barrel. I tasted some Irish whiskey there. It was a bit of an education. Obviously, I've been around whiskey a while. I had tried some Irish whiskeys. Been around the block, if you will. But on this trip, besides playing the whole Guinness game, which is fun, I recommend it, I also wanted to try a bunch of Irish whiskeys, and I did. And I'd say I learned some things, and I wanted to share those. I've also just been continuing the education. So this is for people who are familiar with whiskey, but maybe not familiar with Irish whiskey. One disclaimer off the top: I would not consider myself an expert in Irish whiskey. This is Drew P's takes on Irish whiskey. So if you respect what I have to say about bourbon, rye, American whiskey, Scotch, things of that nature, then this is going to be up your alley, I think. And just do with it what you will. The unofficial sponsor for tonight's episode is Athletic Brewing. Big fan of NA beers. When I want something that feels delicious and beer-esque, Athletic. They did not pay me to say this, but I also I think it's a good thing for those of us who are trying not to overconsume, working hard, managing ourselves. Athletic rocks. Big fan of Athletic. Okay, to the topic. What's the deal with Irish whiskey? First, let's just talk about what it is as a whiskey in general. The very first thing to understand is it's very similar to Scotch pre-aging, meaning that it's a malt or other grain based distillate that's been aged in wood for over 3 years. There are some other minor legal things like the amount of alcohol that's allowed to be in it when distilled, and it has to be bottled at 40% alcohol by volume or higher. It's basically Scotch, but not in Scotland. But is it exactly like Scotch later on? We're going to talk about that. Bottom line is malt or grain based distillate, aged in wood, barrels longer than 3 years, bottled at alcohol by volume higher than 40%. 40% or higher. A smidge bit of history, and actually I learned this recently. I had always thought that whiskey was basically invented in Scotland. That's wrong, not true, and I'm sure I heard this in tours, bourbon tours, many times, and I don't think it ever really registered with me that whiskey was actually invented in Ireland, and then the Scotch took it. So not only did I learn that, but I've also learned that Irish whiskey was the world's biggest whiskey for a really long time. Kind of had its heyday in the late 1700s and then into the 1800s before it kind of got beat out by Scotch and then bourbon. Now it is coming back for sure. Every whiskey had its dark ages in the 1970s, 1980s. You see this massive shrinking and consolidation of the Irish whiskey industry to the point that there was only 3 distilleries active in Ireland. So those 3 distilleries merge under one Irish distillers group, basically to compete with Scotch and bourbon. That kind of followed the traj of bourbon in the 60s, 70s, as everybody moved away from aged spirits into vodka, things of that nature. So you saw all these bourbon distilleries close, very similar in Ireland, just Ireland had it worse. And then now with the bourbon boom, Irish whiskey also growing really rapidly, and we're back up to 40 plus different Irish distilleries. Now, what we also see in Irish whiskey, similar to bourbon, is that a lot of those distilleries, while they're cranking out stuff now, it's still hella young. And so they are releasing their products, or they're releasing products that they've sourced from other distilleries. Still on the early end of my Irish whiskey learning here, so if you want to ask me what's all from where, I can't tell you that. I can tell you a little bit, but now I'm here to just hawk some takes, which is I think what you're here for. When we're talking about Irish whiskey, they kind of break up into categories that are fairly simple. Single malt, which is like in Scotland, made from 100% malted barley from one distillery. Fairly cut and dry. What I have seen on the shelf is what's called single pot still, and that's like a distillery trying to get really, really aggressive and differentiated, and instead of like doing work to make their whiskey better, they're just saying, hey, this is actually from one still in a distillery, as distilleries could have multiple. So basically one distillate batch, one still ends up in the bottle. Does that matter? No, I don't think it matters at all from a flavor perspective, but shout out marketing. There's also grain whiskey, so you can see single grain, so wheat-based stuff, even corn, and then you have blended. So, you can take single malt, single grain, single pot still, whatever. If it qualifies as an Irish whiskey, you can blend that together, blended Irish whiskey. Much of what we see on the shelf, JMO, for instance, Jameson, Tullamore Dew, those are blended Irish whiskeys. So it's not blended whiskey in the same way that American blended whiskey tends to be like whiskey blended with neutral grain spirit. That's not what we're talking about. That's not in play here. I'm sure that does happen, but it wouldn't qualify as Irish whiskey. Prominent brands, you know a lot of them. I just mentioned Tullamore Dew, Jameson, Bushmills, Teeling has been a rapidly growing brand. Was a distillery that was around for a while, sold, and now there's this new Teeling distillery. The Spot series, not a distillery, but prominent brand. And then Redbreast, another big one. Redbreast cask strength 12 year is probably like the Irish whiskey that bourbon geeks shout out, mainly because I think we like cask strength. We're looking for something to punch us a little bit. And a lot of Irish whiskey, quite frankly, is put on the shelf at 40% alcohol by volume, which is just really chill. Like, if you take the chill nature of a 40% alcohol by volume product and you couple that with Irish whiskey, which is distilled from grains that generally don't pack a lot of flavor, you have a whiskey that generally doesn't pack a lot of flavor. Maybe the Irish whiskey lovers among you are gonna come at me. Listen, I don't care. Like, most of the Irish whiskeys I've had have tasted like diet scotch. There's some hairspray mixed with honey kind of notes, maybe some light cashew and lemon zest. Not exactly what I'm reaching for when I want like a whiskey. Irish whiskey most often is whiskey for people who don't like whiskey. Jameson gets shot at a bar, it's St. Patrick's Day, somebody brings a bottle of Tullamore Dew to the party. Why? Because it's an Irish whiskey and they saw it was $30 and they're cheap, so they grabbed it. You don't often see, for a really special occasion, people reaching for Irish whiskeys. Not to say that there probably aren't some really exquisite Irish whiskeys. So I thought what might be fun is for me to run to the store and try to pick something out on the shelf that I think like packs some appeal, something that makes me want to buy it. I'm looking for something that looks like it's going to be flavorful, crafted well aged, affordable price. So I'm going to leave you right here, and then I'm going to come right back and we're going to talk about it. What up, nation? Here I am outside of an alleged liquor store, unnamed, and the goal is here to run in and see if I can find an Irish whiskey that looks interesting. I don't often shop for Irish whiskey, so I felt like, given my experiences in Ireland, trying to make a what's the deal with Irish whiskey video, I should get a little bit of experience. So the goal is to walk out with a bottle that we think is good. We'll see how that goes. That's not what we're about. That's not who we are. Alright, listen.
That's a tall order, okay? As a bourbon guy, and a guy who initially got into Scotch, shopping for Irish whiskey, not only is the selection fine, you know, there's not a ton of options, but they all look the dang same. Triple distilled, pot still, malt grain. Bottom line is, and also the pricing, which we'll talk about more in a second, but it's just a tough scene. You know, the one product that looked semi-promising is this one. It's cask strength, teeling, wine, but no age statement. So it's like, I imagine it's teeling distillate, young, finished in wine. They don't even tell you which wine. So it's probably going to taste like young Irish whiskey with some probably pretty good wine finishing flavor. Bottom line, I'm not going to spend $80 on a crapshoot. We're past that part of my whiskey journey. So I don't know what else to tell you. Okay, I got the JMO taster because I said I was gonna get something. So let's go back to the house and let's do a little review, shall we?
Okay, well, yeah, that was what it was. That was Total Wine too. So I thought that of all vendors, they might have a pretty decent selection, but what I've learned at Total Wine is you avoid Spirits Direct. Can't have it. Get out of here with that. There's no place in the world for Total Wine Spirits Direct products. Also, 40% alcohol by volume stuff didn't appeal to me. We weren't going there. So anything 46 and above, we're in the ballpark. Unfortunately, anything 46 and above with like good age on it was over $100. Like Irish whiskey is bananas expensive in the United States. Wasn't that way in Ireland. Makes sense. I get it. You don't have to explain international economics to me. But it was just too expensive. So not going there. I left in despair, really. My ending conclusions with what's the deal with Irish whiskey is that there are some interesting products, but you got to go out of your way to get them, and then they're just too expensive for what they are. So before we get on to the final part of today's show, which is a Jameson review, because I did, in my despair, after committing to getting a bottle of Irish whiskey, bought a bottle of Jameson to review. I thought we'd talk about some of the whiskeys that I had on my vacation. So I'll share a picture here with you. I started the trip with a flight of 18-year-old single malt Irish whiskeys at a really cool whiskey bar there in Dublin. So it was called the Whiskey Reserve. It's right next to a pretty famous pub. I'm pretty sure it's the Temple Bar. The Temple Bar in Temple Bar. Had a blast in Dublin, in short. If you want to hear more about the trip, maybe we do a live show at some point and talk about Ireland. But it was a flight of 18-plus-year-old Irish single malts. So it's Tullamore Dew, Tullamore Dew 18, Bushmills 18, a sourced whiskey called Dunville, and then that's from Belfast, and then a Whiskey Reserve private label product. And in general, like the Tullamore Dew was fine. It was sweet, light, honey, not really grainy, which was nice. I mean, it was good. It was nice, delicious. But you know, the Tullamore Dew 18 is like a $175 bottle here, and you know, I would much rather go for like Oban 18 for somewhere in the 140 to 150 range versus shelling out for Tullamore Dew. Like Oban 18 for me is exquisite. That's Scotch, by the way. Love it. Yeah, Tullamore Dew more reminded me of like a Balvenie, like 15-year Caribbean cask. You know, it's an $80 Scotch. Value's just not hitting. The Bushmills 18 was, it wasn't Bushmills 18 in this flight. It was Bushmills 21. The Bushmills 21 was a little bit deeper, a little bit more like cherry, pruny. You can tell there was a little bit more like sherry influencing, maybe a touch of port in there as well. I really liked that. That was probably my favorite in the flight. Things got funky with the Dunville. There was like notes of anise, and I'm not sure what all was going on with that. Wouldn't drink it again, really, but interesting to try, a flavor experience. Then the Whiskey Reserve private label bottling was just like, you know, sometimes you get old barrels of whiskey that are old, so there's some additional value there, but it still tastes like weird, like not great. That was kind of the Whiskey Reserve private label. Not bad, but it didn't, like, the way I would tier them is Bushmills 21 #1 far and away, like solid, but again, $250 for a bottle of that. Then the Tullamore Dew 18, then the funky Dunville situation, and then the Whiskey Reserve private label. Now, one of the things I need to kind of mention too when talking about those products and all Irish whiskeys, I mentioned before, like a lot of these products are sourced from, you know, one of the 2 or 3 distilleries that has been around for a while. Like if you want anything that's been aged longer than like 15 years, it's probably going to be from like Middleton Distillery. Middleton did so much of the distillation that has served aged Irish whiskeys for a long time. So a lot of what you get is that. Later on in the trip, I tried the Yellow Spot 12. That was nice, kind of bourbony, and I know they use American oak in that, so serviceable. But again, a bottle of Yellow Spot 12-year-old, which is not anywhere close to barrel proof, is well over $100 here, where you can get 12-year-old bourbons for less than $100. So do you want like diet bourbon for $150, or do you want bourbon? Like, for me, I kind of want bourbon, but maybe that's just me. And then I finished the trip at a very cool hotel, and I tried Middleton Very Rare, the 2024 vintage. That is a very expensive bottle. I saw the 2023 vintage at Total Wine while I was there, and it was like $450. The like 1.5 ounce pour I had at the bar was like $35 in Ireland, but I really wanted to try, like, all right, let's send it, like, give me a really good Irish whiskey. And gosh, like, you know, again, I think I'd take Oban 18 over it. It's sweet, it's fruity, it's still 40% alcohol by volume, so it doesn't pack intensity, and the complexity is really, like, it's just not there. So again, the finishing conclusion, Drew P's takes on Irish whiskey are, it's fine. It's fine, it's accessible, it's overpriced for what you get. And a lot of Irish whiskey that gets consumed, like this guy, is, before I taste, you know what, I'm gonna control myself. I'm going to try to give this a fair shake. So before I poo-poo on it, because I've had it a few times, I have some thoughts, I have some memories, I'm gonna just swallow my hubris, and we're gonna revisit this. So Jamin is a blended Irish whiskey, so there's probably some single malt stuff, there's probably some grain stuff going on. We're not entirely sure what's all going on. Triple distilled, that's another buzzword that shows up in Irish whiskey a lot. They use a lot of pot stills, so, you know, to do that and get a high enough alcohol product, you need to distill it a few times. They claim triple distillation helps mellow things out, create a smoother, sweeter whiskey. Like, again, you're talking about grain-based distillate, it's already going to be smooth and sweet, and that's just about it. Okay, so what I remember about Jameson and what hits me on the nose, the very first impression is like when you go to the YMCA and you walk into the like an indoor swimming pool, the chlorine in the air, you know, there's sort of like a the smell of plastic floaties as well. That's what Jameson on the nose reminds me of. YMCA swimming pool. It has a little hairspray. Like my mom would use hairspray a lot, so you go into the bathroom after your mom uses hairspray, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. You inhale through your mouth and you can taste it. It's sort of, you know, floral poison, but it's sweet floral poison. There's just not like, it's not very inviting. I see why you shoot it. Like I see why Jameson's a popular shooter, because you don't want to think about what you're gonna do to your body for too long. Palate wise, not nearly so offensive as the nose. Still a little bit of like when you're blowing up those floaties I was talking about. It's really sweet. Sweet in kind of a simple syrup, agave nectar kind of way. Some vanilla. Kind of oily, like surprisingly tactile, oily. Finish hits you with kind of that hairspray. Feels like it almost evaporates off the back of your tongue. White pepper and hairspray, fingernail polish. It's serviceable. Again, like if you don't like whiskey, but you're looking for something that won't burn, smooth, I want to shoot it, I'm looking to get hammered. I mean, this will do the job. I'd say you drink enough of it, it'll probably get you good and hammered. And it's probably not going to burn too bad. It's fairly cheap. Jameson is cheap relative to those higher aged single malt Irish whiskeys. I'd much rather have like bottom shelf bourbon, Evan Williams bottled in bond. You can even, for the price, Elijah Craig. You can get Elijah Craig for the same price as a bottle of Jameson, and it's just like 12 times better. Probably aged twice as long, well, probably 3 times as long as the Jameson in new oak with corn, which has way more flavor, corn and rye, you know, versus like barley and wheat, or there's some other grain they use there that is escaping me. I'm team bourbon squad. I think that's just the moral of the story, and I'm team Scotch over Irish whiskey too. Like, final thoughts on comparing Irish whiskey to Scotch. It feels like the Irish invented distillation, and then Scotland learned, hey, they're distilling these grains, okay, let's distill those. And then they're like, actually, this doesn't like taste enough. We need more taste. So then they did the peat thing, which on occasion I'm down for that. But then they're like, all right, we need like heavy sherry or heavy port, like Madeira, rum, like let's throw the kitchen sink at this to try and bring more flavor, and in some cases they crushed it. So and then the value of Scotch is just that much better. I can't figure out why Irish whiskey is so dang expensive. Like, Scotland is on an island too, so maybe you can hit me with that information if you are aware why you know, the Irish feel like they can charge what they do for their product. Bring me some information, help me on this learning journey. But it's hard for me not to consider Irish whiskey generally just an abomination in the whiskey verse. I would take Japanese whiskey over it. The only whiskey I would probably, and maybe this is a future video, kind of hesitate before I would put over Irish whiskey is Canadian whiskey. Also a travesty. And I speak in generalizations, don't at me. I hope you guys enjoyed this take. I hope you found it helpful if you're considering like, hey, should I get into Irish whiskey? Probably not. Just like, let's get past that. Like, let's do Scotch, let's do bourbon. There's enough there to keep you busy. American whiskey. I mean, not only do we have bourbon, but we have rye. We have, you know, blended American whiskeys. That is a wide open playing field full of flavor and value. And even though prices have gone up, guys, let me tell you, like, I almost walked out with Bullet 12 year for $55. 12 year rye, Bullet 12 year rye, $55. There is so much good stuff still on the shelf in the American whiskey category for way under $100. We'll catch y'all next time. Maybe five Irish whiskeys you don't need. We'll see. Till then, maybe pour yourself some bourbon and then keep it neat.